Every gacha game starts out with a standard 5-star selection, and over time, limited 5-star characters will drop, which will of course hold more value than the standard 5-star characters, by either providing more support or dealing more damage, and gradually that gap in value will become even more distant. However, in Zenless, the gap between standard 5 stars and limited 5 stars might already be a bit too large, with us only being just over 3 months into the game. With that being said, it would lead to standard 5 stars not being as valuable as they initially were a bit too soon. Now, by no means am I saying standard 5 stars are now terrible, as they can clear pretty much majority of content, but limited 5 stars do in fact make difficult content not seem difficult. Additionally, with limited 5-star characters becoming even stronger, this would argue for the need of new difficult endgame content to drop very soon. So with that, I'm gonna go over our limited 5-star characters so far and how much more value they exactly hold over our standard 5 stars, along with when we could possibly expect new endgame content to drop, as well as how they may implement it. Just before we jump into it, as always, would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel for more ZenlessZoneZero content and drop a like if you enjoyed the video. Now, taking it back to 1.0 and the limited banner characters being Ellen and Zhu Yuan, both are insane S-rank attackers that have had no problem in clearing endgame content since launch, as they are pretty much capable of brute forcing their way through with the amount of DPS they can deal. Additionally, since they had great teammates from release, they were easily able to deal a lot more DPS than the standard 5-star attackers being Soldier 11 and Nekomata. So along with naturally dealing lower amounts of DPS due to being standard 5 stars, the fact that Soldier 11 and Nekomata didn't have the greatest teammates just makes it more difficult to enable them to perform at their best. Now again, this isn't to say that Soldier 11 and Nekomata aren't able to clear endgame content, as they are able to, but with Zhu Yuan and Ellen, they do kind of breeze past Shiyu defense, whereas it might be a slight challenge for players with Soldier 11 and Nekomata, as it would require more investment and you would still of course have less chances to mess up. Specifically with Zhu Yuan, on top of being the hardest hitting burst damage dealer in 1.0, the fact that her core passive grants a massive 30% crit rate boost for 10 seconds after using one of multiple abilities allows her to pretty much completely overshadow other DPS characters, as with hardly any investment, you are able to consistently crit with Zhu Yuan and deal insane damage. So with the attackers of 1.0, they released with extremely valuable kits, as they were able to deal lots of damage with minimal investment, which of course led to many players that picked these characters up to not find much of a struggle in Shiyu defense. Then moving on to 1.1, where the difference in power becomes a lot more significant. Jane and Qingyi were the limited characters at release, and both completely shook up the meta, with Qingyi releasing first and debuted as our first limited stun character in the game. Now at the time, and it still pretty much is, arguably the best standard banner character was Lycan, which is also a stun character. The most valuable trait in Lycan's kit is the ability to increase the stun damage multiplier by 35%. So when an enemy is stunned, instead of 150%, there would be a 185% damage multiplier on them whilst they are stunned. Also, Lycan is capable of dealing more days than a usual stun character and decreases ice resistance by 25% for 30 seconds when using an EX special attack. Now as for Qingyi, she also has the ability of increasing the stun damage multiplier, so of course it would be fair to expect for it to be slightly higher than Lycan's, as she is a limited character. Well, Qingyi is in fact able to increase the damage multiplier by up to a massive 80%, so over double the amount Lycan is able to increase it by. Additionally, on top of her basic attacks dealing 20% more days, Qingyi receives a 600 flat attack buff depending on her impact, which would enable her to be somewhat of a damage dealer as well as a stun character. So already, Qingyi is able to provide a lot more utility with her potent stun damage multiplier buff and being capable of dealing considerable damage. The cherry on top is that Qingyi's core passive is much less restrictive, as it would be activated from either a character of the same faction or an attacker, which enables Qingyi to even replace Lycan on his best team if you wanted to, as Ellen is an attacker and so would activate Qingyi's core passive. So not only is Qingyi able to provide more utility, but having more team flexibility as well would of course allow her to completely overshadow Lycan. Then as for our seductive rat of 1.1, Jane Doe, not only did she instantly blow past our normally DPS competitors, but pretty much every DPS character in the game by miles, mainly due to her insane core passive which allows for Assault having a chance to crit, therefore leading to ridiculous numbers such as above 1,000,000 damage. Also, Assault critting isn't just restricted to Jane, as her teammates can also crit when triggering Assault, just if Jane has inflicted the flinch effect on the enemy beforehand. Which means Jane is an amazing character to play alongside pretty much any physical type character. So taking a look at Grace being the standard S-rank anomaly DPS, she does definitely have a fun and quick playstyle whilst being able to trigger shock very quick. However, with Jane, she is also able to provide that fun and quick playstyle, but is able to deal significantly more damage on top, which can be considered as overkill, and to the point where she can easily brute force her way through Shiyu defense regardless of attribute advantage. Now as for the 1.2 characters being Caesar and Burnice, they really did not stop the brakes, and especially with Caesar, which is technically the only S-rank defender in the game, but she is more or less considered as a support character, so I will be comparing her to other S-rank supports. Now Caesar is arguably the best character in the game, as she is pretty much a one-man army, given that she is able to deal considerable damage, has the ability to counter any attack, deals more daze than usual characters, so you could rely on her to be your stun character, provides a shield to allies with near enough 100% uptime that reduces the amount of damage taken along with increasing anti-interrupt, and the cherry on top, is able to increase all allies attack by 1000 flat attack. So it's clear enough to see the amount of utility Caesar possesses in her kit backs her claim as the best character in the game and has enough longevity to last a while. So in comparison to someone like Rina, which can pretty much only provide a pen ratio increase buff to allies and increase electric damage by 10%, allows Caesar to completely overshadow Rina, making her one of the least desirable S-rank characters in the game. Which is a bit of a shame, as standard support characters tend to have enough value to last a while in Hoyoverse games, but in Rina's case, she is unfortunately underwhelming and kinda allows Caesar to shine even brighter as a support. Now as for Burnice, considering that she is our first true off-field damage dealer with the ability of triggering her anomaly quicker than any other anomaly character, just makes her an extremely valuable character, and in comparison to someone like Grace, which would require more field time to trigger shock, would of course hinder the efficiency in triggering disorder. So with our two anomaly limited characters, there is Jane that can deal significantly more damage than Grace, and then there is Burnice, which can trigger an anomaly much quicker and require less field time than Grace, therefore leaving not much reason to even want Grace if you already have Jane and Burnice. So these are the current limited characters we have so far and the ridiculous value they each hold, and soon we will be moving on to Yanagi and Laita, which I definitely expect to also be insane characters that can offer a ton of utility. Then moving slightly ahead into 1.4, there is a very high chance we will finally be receiving Miyabi, which is a character that has been hyped since before the game, and just as a speculation, I do believe Miyabi will in fact break the game and will be somewhat like Acheron when she released in StarRail. So if Miyabi does release as the most broken character by far, it would warrant for there to definitely be new endgame content by 1.4, since as of now, endgame isn't the most difficult content to clear and arguably is just a lot easier than endgame in other Hoyoverse titles. So especially considering the fact that Zenless was marketed as a combat focused game, I would have expected endgame to be slightly more difficult than it already is, but that should change by 1.4. Now as for how they may implement new endgame, of course they could introduce a completely new mode that will have its own schedule and coexist with Shiyu defense. Also, similar to how StarRail pushes for specific metas in each endgame mode, a new mode could do the same and allow for specific factions each update to possibly deal bonus damage. The second option would be more simple with more of a chance of happening, since it is slightly early for a whole new mode, which would be to add additional floors into the critical node, as we currently do have 7 floors to clear, so I do definitely expect this being raised to 10 and possibly by 1.4, to of course accommodate to the bar being raised significantly by Miyabi. Either option they go with, I do definitely think new endgame content is needed, as characters are becoming extremely powerful and it doesn't seem like it will stop anytime soon. So of course there would need to be content in order to provide somewhat of a challenge. Overall, limited characters in Zenless have really been amazing design wise, but in terms of power, they might be a bit overtuned, as now the standard banner selection doesn't really look appealing at all. Whereas in other Hoyoverse games, they are still in fact valuable and viable characters to use. That being said, the standard banner characters are still definitely viable as they can clear endgame content, but with limited characters making it look like a cakewalk, and after accumulating enough to fill up 2 teams, there would be no need to use standard 5 stars unless you really like the character. So again, as more stronger limited characters release, endgame is expected to become more difficult in order to keep up with limited characters. And so I do expect new endgame content to be dropping very soon, and possibly by 1.4. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel for more ZenlessZoneZero content, and if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. Also drop a comment down below on what do you think about the current balance between limited characters and standard banner characters. Do you agree with the fact that limited characters might be a bit too powerful overall, or am I completely overlooking the value of standard banner characters? And yeah, hope to catch you guys later.